Okay, we continue our series, only a few more weeks probably. As a child of God and member of one of the Lord's churches, our lives are to correspond to a particular way of life, referred to in Acts 9 as this way. This life that we're talking about requires the duty of Proverbs 4:23, and we'll go there. We began looking at this last week. Proverbs 4, verse 23. This is the central duty of the life that we're called to live. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it, our hearts, are the issues of life. We saw last week that this is a personal work. It's not something that anyone can do for you. It's not something you can do for anyone else. It's keep thy heart. We see also the manner of performing the duty. It is with all diligence. Not just with diligence, but with all diligence. That is, it's to take priority over everything else, with all diligence. We see the importance of the duty, for out of it are the issues of life. Everything that we are is the heart. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So it's important that we keep the heart with all diligence. Now these, of course, are the words of Solomon. Solomon had a lot of problems. Solomon had a lot of sin. But by the time he wrote Proverbs, he seemed to have a grasp on the importance of the heart. He spoke of it often. Proverbs 2 and verse 2, he said, "Incline thine ear unto wisdom, and apply thine heart to understanding." Make application to your heart. In Proverbs 3 verse 1, he said, "Let thine heart keep my commandments." Proverbs 4 verse 4, "Let thine heart retain my words." They're to be stored in our hearts. Notice in Proverbs 4 verse 20 and 21, he says, "My son, attend to my words, incline thine ear unto my sayings, let them not depart from thine eyes, keep them in the midst of thine heart." In Proverbs chapter 22, we're going to look at a lot of verses tonight. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 17. "Bow down thine ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply thine heart unto my knowledge." It's not just enough to hear. There has to be the heart. Proverbs 23:12, "Apply thine heart unto instruction, and thine ears to the words of knowledge." Hearing with the ears and the heart are two entirely different matters. In Proverbs 3 verse 1, "Let thine heart keep my commandments." Proverbs 3:3, "Write them." The them goes back to mercy and truth. To write is to make an impression. It's to leave a mark. It's to be impressed upon our hearts. It's to leave a mark upon our hearts. If it doesn't, it's a sham. It's nothing. He says, "Write them upon the table of thine heart. Proverbs 6, verse 21, bind them, that is the commandments of father, the commandment of father and the law of mother, continually upon thine heart. Bind them, that is fasten. Fasten them upon thine heart, so that they don't leave. Proverbs 7, verse 3, again, write them, that is the words and commandments, upon the table of thine heart. In Proverbs 3, verse 5, we're to trust in the Lord with all thine heart. With all thine heart. A lot of people talk about trusting God, but talking about it and doing it in your heart, two completely different things. Proverbs 6:25, lust not after her beauty in thine heart. A warning against sin in our hearts. Again, by the time Solomon wrote Proverbs, he seemed to have a grasp upon the importance of the heart. And again, if we're going to live this way of Acts 9, attention, diligent attention, must be given to our hearts. And that's so in all circumstances. That's so in all events, all happenings. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. So I want to begin to look at what is included in this duty. What does that mean? Keep thy heart. Keep. It means guard. Guard your heart at all times. It's to garrison, it's to watch. Watch your heart with all diligence. Now you think about guarding something. When you guard something, it's basically twofold. It's to keep what is there. That's one purpose of guarding. Another purpose of guarding is to keep it from being stolen. So two basic aspects of keeping our heart. And though the duty is manifold, keep thy heart, it's basically twofold. It basically comes down to these two things. Keep the good that is there in. Keep the bad out. That's the twofold duty of keep thy heart. From the negative, we're to keep our heart from certain conditions. And from the positive, we're to keep our heart in certain conditions. Again, it's a manifold duty, but it all falls under these two basic things. So tonight, we want to look at shutting out all that is opposed to God from the heart. Next week, we'll look at it from the positive. But part of guarding the heart is to keep out. Keep out that which would enter in. We cannot allow our hearts to be stolen. Absalom, who is an excellent type of salvation or Satan, he's also a good picture of those who work for him. But you look at Absalom. In preparation for his rebellion against his father David, what did he do? He stole the hearts of the men of Israel. That's where he started. That's where it always starts. Notice in 2 Samuel chapter 15. 2 Samuel chapter 15. And in verse 6, the last part of that verse, it says, Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And you can read it and see how he went about doing that. That's not our point tonight. But in verse 12, the last part of that verse, for the people increased continually with Absalom. So Absalom stole their hearts, and the people were increasingly being drawn to Absalom. Why? Because he had their hearts. Once something has your heart, you're done. You're going to be drawn to that. Then notice verse 13. And there came a messenger to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. That is, they are drawn to Absalom. They are pulled in the direction of Absalom. Why? Because he stole their hearts. He had their hearts. It wasn't just a matter of convincing them mentally. He had stolen their hearts. And he was good at it. And it's not our intent to preach on that, but the message there. You can look at the tactics of Absalom, and it's how Satan works. It's how the people who work for him work as well. But like Satan, Absalom was very diligent in his work. And he knew in preparation of his rebellion, he knew that he needed the hearts of the people to accomplish his purpose of revolt. He knew that. He had to have their hearts. Satan knows that as well. Satan really doesn't care if you go through all the outward motions of religion, because it's abominable to God. He doesn't care if you do that. What he does care about is when your heart is in it. And he'll do everything he can to steal the hearts of God's people. We'll not turn there, but in Matthew 13, verse 19, we see that he seeks to devour that which was sown in the heart. And that is still true today. God is a jealous God. God requires our heart. Satan knows that. God claims, he lays all claim to our hearts. He tells us in Deuteronomy 6 and verse 5 that we're to love him with what? All our heart. Not just our lips, but with all of our heart. Notice in Psalm 119 and verse 2. Psalm 119, verse 2. Blessed are they that keep his testimonies and that seek him with the whole heart. He wants us to seek him. Not half-heartedly, but with the whole heart. He requires the heart. The Pharisees, the only thing they're interested in is the outward. But God requires the heart. In Jeremiah chapter 29 and verse 13. Jeremiah 29, verse 13. And ye shall seek me and find me when, so it's a condition, when ye shall seek me with your whole, when ye shall search for me with all your heart. The truth is, we do not truly serve God, and we cannot be loyal to God And we cannot be devoted and submissive to God without the heart. All the outward, all the external may appear fine, but the truth is, without the heart, we don't serve God. Without the heart, we're not loyal to God. That's why, again, people today, they talk about faithfulness. And most don't know the first thing about it. And when they talk about faithfulness, they're just looking on the outward. Of course, that's all man can do. But faithfulness goes deeper than that. You can have all the outward and be unfaithful. So we must guard against our hearts being drawn aside from God. That's what Absalom did. He drew the hearts of the men of Israel aside from David to himself. We have to guard our hearts from being drawn away from God. We have to pay close attention at all times to the direction in which our hearts are moving. Again, we say it all the time. I believe we need to stop several times a day and just look at where we're headed in our thinking, in our hearts. Look where you're going. Because again, if you stay in a road long enough, eventually you're going to get there. And you may not want to get to where you're headed. So, examine the direction of your heart. That's part of keeping thy heart. Again, it is a dangerous possibility that the child of God continue in the external matters of serving God, yet all the while their hearts are moving further and further and further from God. Again, the verse we looked at last week, Isaiah 29:13, wherefore the Lord said, for as much as this people draw near me with their mouth and with their lips do honor me. That is, they said all the right things, but have removed their heart far from me. That is, their heart is at a distance from God. And then it goes on to say, and their fear, their reverence, their outward reverence, their external reverence for me is taught by the precept of men. Had nothing to do with God. They come up with their own rules. That's what Pharisees do. They come up with their own rules. They come up with their own standard of righteousness. Outwardly right, but distant from God. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. We're to guard against anything that would come before God in our lives externally and internally. Must guard against anything that would become a hindrance in serving the Lord. Again, not just externally, but more importantly, internally. So throughout the Scriptures, we read of negative heart conditions. And there's many. And we'll only look at a few, and many of them overlap. But these are conditions that the heart must be kept from. And if our hearts are neglected, you can mark it down, they will automatically fall into these conditions. If we fail to keep our heart, these conditions will be so in our life. There is the discouraged heart. We read of it in Numbers 32 concerning the spies and the people. Notice in Numbers 32, verses 7 through verse 9. And wherefore discourage ye the heart of the children of Israel? from going over into the land which the Lord hath given them. Thus did your fathers when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. For when they went up unto the valley of Escol and saw the land, they discouraged the heart of the children of Israel. There is such a thing as a discouraged heart. You can have a smile on your face. You can laugh. You can appear joyful. And it's possible that it's all external. And within is discouragement. Within is misery. The discouraged heart. We have to keep our hearts from being discouraged. Keep our hearts from being discouraged. There is the obstinate heart. The stubborn heart. Deuteronomy chapter 2. Again, if we fail to keep our hearts, these conditions will come upon us. In Deuteronomy chapter 2 and verse 30, notice his heart obstinate. That is stubborn. Fixed in a bad way here. It's a good thing for our heart to be fixed in the right thing. But when our heart is obstinate, it's stubborn and fixed in the wrong thing. And the wrong thing is whatever's contrary to God. So it is a danger that our heart become obstinate. There, of course, is the proud heart. We read of it in Deuteronomy 8, verse 14. But notice also in Psalm 101 and verse 5, he speaks of a high look. That's external pride. And the proud heart, that's internal pride. One can have outwardly, externally, a look of humility. They can come across as a humble person. But inwardly, they're proud. A proud heart. And if you really begin to dissect sin, all sin, somewhere there's pride. In every sin we commit, there's pride. A proud heart. A proud heart is very dangerous. Because a proud heart is going to sin over and over and over again. There is the hard heart. Sort of goes along with the obstinate heart, but really not the same thing. The hard heart is an unreceptive heart. Unreceptive to God. They can sit in a church service, they can hear the Word of God, but in their heart they never receive it. They receive it in their mind, but it has not been received in the heart. Well, how do you know if someone has received it in their heart? It's going to be a change, because out of it are the issues of life. I've seen people sit in church for a long, long time. They're there every Sunday, every Wednesday, and I've never seen a change in them. Never have. Never have. Not one single time. They have hard hearts. They're unreceptive. The seed just falls on the surface. It's quickly devoured. There's the froward heart. That's a heart that is averse. It's a heart that is unwilling. It's unyielding. It's ungovernable. And it's also brazen. They're not ashamed of their unwillingness. They're not ashamed that they do not yield to the Lord. He speaks of it, notice in Proverbs chapter 11, in verse 20. Again, we're all subject to these conditions of heart. Therefore, we must keep our hearts. Proverbs 11:20, they that are of a froward heart are abomination to the Lord. But such as are upright in their way are His delight. So we can understand froward by understanding upright, because they're opposites here. To be upright is to be conformable to God. To be froward in heart is again to be averse to God. Keep thy heart from becoming froward. There is the perverse heart. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 8. The last part, a perverse heart shall be despised. A perverse heart is a twisted heart. You can't reason with it because it's perverted. It's twisted. It's a heart that is already turned aside. There is the fretting heart. And that's more than worry. It includes that, but it's more than that. Notice in Proverbs 19, verse 13. Verse 3. The foolishness of man perverteth his way, and his heart fretteth against the Lord. It's a heart that is agitated. It's agitated. In this case, it's agitated against the Lord. It's a heart that is in a state of commotion. It's what Jesus said to the apostles, let not your heart be troubled. Don't let your heart be in a state of commotion. It's not necessarily worry. Something happens and you just fall all to pieces. There's commotion in your heart. Don't do that. Don't let your heart become fretful. Proverbs 24:19. Fret not thyself because of evil men, neither be thou envious at the wicked. Fret not thyself because of evil men. Do not allow your heart to become in a state of commotion because of the acts of others. We do that all the time. We get in a state of frenzy in our hearts over things that don't even affect us. They're going to have no bearing on our life. We get in a state of commotion. That's a fretful heart. We need to keep our hearts from that. There's the covetous heart. Heart that's always desiring something else. There's the uncircumcised heart. Read of it in several places. It's closed. It's impervious. There's the foolish and darkened heart that we read of in Romans 1:21. Their foolish heart was darkened. How sad. Their heart is foolish, and then on top of that, it's been darkened. That's pretty bad. Their foolish heart was darkened. There was the impenitent heart that we read of in Romans 2, verse 5. A heart that refuses to repent, refuses to confess sin, refuses to turn from sin. It may agree to confess, but it doesn't turn. That's not repentance. There is no repentance without conversion, without a turning from. An impenitent heart. There, of course, is a double heart. A double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. But each of these heart conditions are in opposition to God. And they are in opposition to spirituality. We cannot be spiritual and have our hearts fall into these conditions. And our hearts are prone to these things. And our hearts will fall into these conditions unless we guard them. And we have to guard them with all diligence. Which means when we see these things coming, when we see the first signs of any of these things, we must look diligently after the cleansing of our heart. God must have our hearts, not just the outward, but the heart. It's like raising a child or training a dog, whatever. Not that I'm putting a dog and a child on the same footing. No, I could say something, but I'm not going to. Our goal is to get their heart. Until that happens, you're going to expend a lot of energy. Gotta get their heart. Have to. And so it is, the Lord must have our hearts. Otherwise, it's just show. It's just outward. We have to confess sin. Because sin in the heart will alienate our wills, our minds, our affections from God. Sin in our hearts will pollute and weaken our entire being. And it will rob us of all that is required to serve God. So keeping the heart includes a diligent searching of the heart. The problem is, we're not very good at searching our own hearts. And one of the reasons is because we're not honest enough. And one of the reasons is because our hearts have already fallen into some of these conditions. So we're not real good. You know, people say, the Lord knows me better than I know myself. Really? You just came to that knowledge? But the truth is, when people say that, they say, nobody knows me like myself. Oh, most people don't know themselves. Not even close. Not even close. We're very bad at searching our own hearts. We're not very thorough. And if we do find something, we can usually justify it. We can usually come up with a reason why it's so. Well, it's because of the way I was raised. It's because so-and-so said something 22 years ago or 40 years ago, and on it goes. None of that's true. You have to be honest. So the first thing we need to realize is I'm not very good at searching my heart because I'm not honest enough to do a thorough search. So we have to get over to Psalm 139, very familiar verses of Scripture. There is one who knows every detail of our hearts. I mean every detail. And it's God. So we have to pray this prayer. Psalm 139, 23 and 24. Search me, O God. Lord, I'm not going to do a thorough enough job. I'm asking you to search me. And know my heart, try me, know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. So it is asking God to search our hearts, and then to show us the results. That can be painful. But we need God to search our hearts. You see, we fail miserably when it comes to dealing with sin in our own lives. We fail miserably in getting to the root of the problem. I have found through the years that most people don't want to go there. They don't want to get to the root of the problem. They would rather put a Band-Aid on a symptom than get to the root of the problem. And that's why they keep doing the same thing over and over and over until you get to the root, till you get to the cause. You're not going to fix anything. You have to get to the root of the problem. And the only way to do that is for God, because we're not honest enough. The only way to do that is for God to search our hearts and then reveal it to us and give us the grace to deal with it. So we have to be aware at all times of any decline of love for the Lord in our hearts. The slightest decline. We've got to take care of that. The slightest decline in joy. We need to stop and take care of it. The slightest decline in sensitivity. Our sensitivity toward God. The slightest decline in passion in our hearts. We have to pay attention to those things. Keep the heart. You have to watch for those things. Watch. And why is it that these heart conditions come upon us? Because we fail to watch. It's like if you hire a security guard for something. I want you to watch this. Next morning you come in, it's gone. You ask the security guard, what happened? Well, I don't know. I wasn't watching. That's basically how we are. Well, I don't know. I don't know how it happened. I wasn't paying any attention. Well, that's how it happened. We weren't paying attention to our hearts. Keeping the heart from a negative spiritual condition or the failure to do so is what is illustrated, and we'll close with this, in Proverbs 24, verses 30 through 34. I went by the field of the slothful, and by the vineyard of the man void of understanding. And I believe that's one field, one vineyard. You can take it as he went by two places, one the slothful, one the one void of understanding. I don't take it that way. I think it's talking about the same person. But I'm not going to argue with you about it. Verse 31, and lo, it, singular, the field, of the slothful, and the vineyard of the man void of understanding, was all grown over with thorns, and nettles had covered the face thereof. And in addition to this, the stone wall thereof, of the field and the vineyard, was broken down. Then I saw and considered it well. I looked upon it and received instruction. And here's the instruction he received. Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man. So Solomon describes in verse 30 what he called the field of the slothful and the vineyard of the man void of understanding. We cannot be slothful in keeping our hearts. And we must not be void of understanding of the importance of keeping our hearts. The truth is, if we understand the importance of the heart, we will be diligent in keeping the heart. We will not be slothful. But the one that Solomon describes here, he has a field. He has a field for agricultural purposes. He has another strip of land, a vineyard. And one day Solomon's out for a walk and he goes by this field. And he goes by this vineyard of this particular man. The estate also consisted of, in verse 31, a stone wall. And Solomon describes what he saw in verse 31. He said it was all grown over with thorns. That's not the purpose of that field and vineyard. And nettles had covered the face thereof, and the stone wall thereof was broken down. And what he saw shocked him. It surprised him. We see that in the first two words of verse 31. And lo. He wasn't expecting to see this. He wasn't expecting to see this man's property to be filled with thorns and nettles, and the wall in disrepair. So what he saw surprised him. He then proceeds to describe the field and the vineyard. Again, it was all grown over. Not just a few thorns, it was grown over with thorns. This had been going on for some time. And nettles had covered the face thereof. Now this field and this vineyard were not always like this, because Solomon knew that one time it was a field, one time it was a vineyard. There was a time when the field and the vineyard had great promise, great prospect. There was one time it was probably beautiful to look upon and was of great benefit to the owner. It's of absolutely no benefit now. But now it's all overgrown with thorns and nettles. Overgrown with weeds. It's fruitless. It's fruitless. Solomon also describes a wall. He says, the stone wall thereof, of the field and vineyard, was broken down. Now that stone wall had a purpose. The purpose was to serve as a boundary marker. Boundaries are important. It was also meant to protect his field, his vineyard. Protect it from wild animals getting in and destroying it, or thieves. But the wall was broken down. So the man's property is in a state of ruin. It's in a state of decay. Solomon in verse 32 says that what he saw, he considered it well. As he stopped and he just looked at it for a while. He studied it. He reflected upon what was before him. He goes on to say, looked upon it. So he goes, I'm walking by and I saw this field and this vineyard. But now he's looking upon it. Big difference. Seeing something and looking at something. He's looking upon this field, this vineyard, this broken down wall. He's looking with an observant eye. He's looking with great attention. And as he does so, he says, I received instruction. God showed me something. God taught me something. The instruction, again, is described in verses 33 and 34. All grown over with thorns, nettles had covered the face thereof, and the stone wall was broken down. That didn't happen overnight. Didn't happen overnight. There was a time when that man looked out on his property and he could see there's some thorns out there. Went on. Did something else. Perhaps one day he's walking in his field and he notices a couple of the stones are loose in his wall. Didn't pay it any mind. Went on. Found something else to do. He always had something else to do. Didn't have time. I'm sure if you ask this man, how'd your property get this way? Well, let me tell you. And what he should have said was, I'm lazy. And I'm foolish. That's how it got that way. But again, we're not honest enough. This man is described as slothful. That is, he's disinclined toward his property, toward his responsibility. There are many that are slothful when it comes to keeping the heart. They're disinclined to keeping the heart. You know what will happen eventually? You'll be covered with thorns and nettles. All that shouldn't be there will be there. Thorns and nettles, by the way, are the natural thing. It's what comes naturally. You leave your heart alone, you don't guard it, that which comes naturally will fill it. And that which comes naturally is not good. Is not good. Yes, this man could have tilled the field. He could have cultivated the vineyard had he chosen to do so. But he chose to do something else. He could see the thorns, he could see the nettles, he could see the wall was beginning to crumble. He had the ability to take care of all these things, but every day he thought, just a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands. I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow comes, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll get around to it. And that's the way many are with their hearts. Every day he did something else. Every day. And so sad but true, many of God's people, every day they do something else other than keep their heart. They have a responsibility to keep their heart. But every day, they do something else. And every day they have a reason for not doing what they should have done. We're good at coming up with reasons. And in the meantime, the thorns and the nettles take root. Once they take root, it's more work to get them out. There are a lot of things that take root in our hearts. You know why? Because we fail to keep them. We fail to guard our hearts. We fail to pay attention to the things that take root. It can be anything. It can be legitimate things. The cares of life choke the word, we're told. Cares of life are not necessarily sinful things. But if the cares of life take root in your heart will be a distance from God. You know what happened to this man? There used to be a house in Loveless. It's probably still there. Probably the porch is still the same. I don't know. I don't see how people put that much stuff on a porch. Just junk. And I often wondered, I wonder what he thought when he put the first piece of junk on that porch. I mean, the porch was useless. Couldn't sit on it. Couldn't even walk on it. Too much junk. Well, what did he think when he put that first piece? Just one piece. Pretty soon it was two. Pretty soon it was three. Pretty soon it overtook the whole porch. And you know what? Never met the people, but I imagine they got used to it. Same with our hearts. We allow things to take root in our hearts, and through time, guess what will happen? You'll get used to it. It's not good to get used to a bad heart condition. We need to be busy pulling up the thorns and the nettles that take root in our hearts. We cannot allow the natural to overcome our hearts. If we're going to be truly spiritual, we have to guard our hearts. We have to guard our hearts. Even when we do the right thing, you better guard your heart. Guard your heart even when you do what's right, because evil can creep in. You need to always be looking at our hearts. And the Lord does know our hearts. That's both encouraging and discouraging. He knows. He knows everything that's there. He knows why it's there. So it ought to be our prayer that the Lord would search our hearts. Next week we'll look at keeping our heart in good condition. In order to do that, of course, you've got to keep it out of a bad condition. Brother Ben, if you'd come and lead us in verse song.